because the cooling will make you change your lifestyle habits on a dime when you really see how close we are. It's not going to be 2100. It's not going to be 2050 when we experience these changes. It started this year. We've had decimation of the global crop yields in the Northern Hemisphere.
Adapt 2030 Mini Ice Age Conversations covers changes in our climate due to a new and intensifying grand solar minimum. In the media, overlooking, downplaying, or burying cold weather changes occurring on our planet. This is in order to keep the global warming agenda steaming full speed ahead. I do this podcast and radio program because we need to begin conversations on how to adapt our food growing strategies long before 2030 as agricultural zones shift, affecting global crop output. But very few mainstream media outlets are talking about the most important issue of our time: cold weather crop losses. Our sun is going through a 400-year cycle, which has effects on our weather patterns as our magnetosphere weakens and the jet streams go out of flow. It's not CO2, it's not you, it's the sun. Are you ready to thrive in the grand solar minimum? Then join me for Mini Ice Age Conversations. I'm your host, David Dubine.
Excited to be speaking with my next guest. Before I introduce him, by the way, you'll be aware that this morning commuters in London dragged climate change protesters off the roof of a tube train. That's the London Underground. There were scuffles and people were kicked and beaten. A number of people applauding it while it happened. This has escalated over the last couple of weeks. Extinction Rebellion activists have been protesting in London, and they have been popping up on our television screens, on news and television and radio, telling us that if we don't become carbon neutral immediately, if we don't become zero carbon or zero, what is it? Net carbon, yeah, that's right. Net carbon zero, get it right, Richie. If we don't become net carbon zero real soon, well, all sort of apocalyptic things are going to happen in the next few years, and human life will be transformed on planet Earth. Now, you know I don't believe this. I believe that we are dirtying and polluting and fouling up the earth and the oceans. I think we are doing that, but I don't believe that CO2 created by man and man's activities are changing the climate. I don't believe that. Not because I'm paid by any big oil and gas companies, I just don't believe it. This is Evangelical. Spoke about this in the first hour. And these people want to, speaking of transforming human life, they want us to go back to the Stone Age. And increasingly they are being listened to, and the movement is growing. Now let's speak with my next guest. He's a fascinating man because he used to buy coffee in Southeast Asia, which must have been a fantastic job, very interesting job indeed. And he would have described himself as somebody who believed in the man-made CO2 climate change story. But when he was going about his business in Burma, or Myanmar as we call it now, he began hearing stories about how cold damage was causing problems to farmers in places near the equator. That led him to begin to look for answers, to begin to question the CO2 global warming story. And it led him into reading about and finding out about things like the grand solar minimum and how it is in fact the sun that drives climate change on planet Earth. He's got an excellent website called oilseedcrops.org, and he also makes podcasts, and you can find him on YouTube. I'll put links out. I'm really grateful to him for staying up late. He's in Asia, where it's about 1 o'clock in the morning, so thanks to him for doing it. Let's welcome to the programme David Dubine. David, I'm really honoured to have you on the programme. Thanks for coming on.
Hey, Richie, thank you. I'll get up at any time in the morning because we live in a 24-hour world. Yeah, it looks like Extinction Rebellion is going extinct in itself. I mean, they're trying to have you reduce your lifestyles. It seems like a bunch of middle-class people yapping down to, those with less money that really need to go to work every day and disrupting services. I don't know, everybody's on their soapbox trying to preach. It's such hypocrisy when they have the interviews with so many people leading this Extinction Rebellion. They ask them the simple questions. Do you have a TV? Do your children have iPads? How did you get to this place? Did you drive? Did you take a train? What hypocrisy. They're all in the system driving their SUVs, driving their cars to these protests, buying all the goods. If it's such a climate emergency, why are we not stopping all global commerce at the moment? Forget just air travel. Everything ceases. But, when I was back in the States last week, it was all about buy a second car, get a new car, get a loan for a car, buy a new house, buy this, buy that. Let's just buy more stuff and bring trinkets of junk across the ocean on polluting boats. But nobody wants to talk about that. It's just, hey, you got to reduce your lifestyle here, but don't talk about China's pollution, just ours. We need to reduce our lifestyle. I've noticed a couple things about the Extinction Rebellion and all this climate neutral, say, narrative that's out there. It's not even, in my opinion, true protest. It's a narrative pushed forth by money. And you saw that article that I think it was in, I forget which, it wasn't The Guardian, it was another publication. I think it was Independent in the UK that talked about these protesters were being paid anywhere from £400 to £600 per month to organize the protest. It's not organic, it's paid for.
They are paid for. You're right. It was in The Guardian. It was in the Mail and the Daily Mail here in the UK as well. Many of these middle class, as you properly described them, activists are being paid expenses to the tune of hundreds of thousands of pounds. You made an excellent point there about China. David Duboyne is our guest. Before we talk about your own story, David, which is absolutely fascinating, there's a real kind of evangelical fervour to this Extinction Rebellion movement. It's grown up out of nothing very, very quickly. There's no resistance to it. Well, there is a little bit, but in terms of the media, you made another excellent point there when you said when they appear on television and radio, the presenters give them a very easy ride. One of the things the presenter never does is ask them, can you please explain to me forensically, scientifically, how you know for a fact that in 10 years' time we're going to have these catastrophic weather events. None of that happens. So it's evangelical fervour, very quick, grown exponentially, like nothing I've ever seen. Is that reason to be suspicious of itself, David?
I would. And here's what I'm also thinking is my take on the reason I started this Adapt 2030 YouTube channel and the Mini Ice Age Conversations podcast was to bring information out that the sun does repeat in these cycles. They're repeatable, they're mappable, we know when they come again, and it's already been confirmed the way that the sun behaves with the peaks when it comes into a solar maximum on its 11-year solar maximum. Generally, it has a shorter peak and then it's followed by a higher peak. And usually it's a double peak when we get into the solar maximum. But what they found in reconstructions with different kind of isotopes and observations from the sun is that when it goes into a higher peak first and a secondary lower peak on that, it reverses itself. Then that's confirmation that the next solar cycles, plural, are going into exceptionally low output, which we're heading into right now. And those of you that are listening in the UK, you might be more familiar with the Maunder Minimum and the ice fares on the Thames River. That's where we're going back into right now. Nobody's talking about it. It seems as if they're getting us prepared for the wrong thing. But I will add before, one thing that I see in this Extinction Rebellion message is it's about the lack of food. Everywhere is talking about we're not going to have enough food. We're not going to have enough food. Well, that's the exact same thing I'm saying. We are not going to have enough food because as our crop grow zones get cooler and the crop seasons in terms of planting and harvesting get reduced like we're seeing already, we're not going to have enough food. Now, is this runaway, fervor that's coming out with no resistance in the Extinction Rebellion movement, is it a soft disclosure that we won't have enough food, but they're getting you look to the warming instead of the cooling, because the cooling will make you change your lifestyle habits on a dime when you really see how close we are. It's not going to be 2100. It's not going to be 2050 when we experience these changes. It started this year. We've had decimation of the global crop yields in the Northern Hemisphere, if anybody's paying attention. And here we go. Food prices up on our first true crop. I call this Celeste Bishop Saloom calls it year zero as termed by FEMA in the United States, which is, patient zero when they have a disease in the outbreak, and that's the first patient that they actually, peg this to as the spread of a disease. Well, they're calling this year zero for food crop losses, as this is it, the first year that we start to lose food production globally. And as we march forward, just like Extinction Rebellion's talking about, no food in the future. So their 12-year timeline matches pretty much with Valentina Zharkova's. world governments need to stockpile food right this second to prepare for what's coming in 2028 to 2032, when we literally won't be able to grow enough food for this planet's population at the moment. It's really interesting how the overlay on the timelines is here. It's more like it's soft disclosure. Same thing in America with the crop losses. They're saying, look at the cold, it's wiping out American crops. Yet they're not talking about the grand solar minimum or the late planting. They're just pegging it on a single event. Again, it's soft disclosure to get you ready. And that's where I think the program could go today, because it's in our faces now. We're at year zero and prices up from now, and good luck trying to get your food in the future.
Let's talk. We are going to stay with that theme, because a lot of our listeners will be absolutely staggered to learn that cold temperatures are playing havoc with farmers' yields in America and around the world. This will be the first they will have heard of it, David. That's why it's terrific to have you on the program today. Thanks for mentioning Valentina. She was on the program with me a few weeks ago. I found it fascinating, the mathematician Valentina Zharkova. Before you explain in as simple terms as you possibly can, I know you already did, but break it down again in a second, what the grand solar minimum will mean. I have a question for you. I think you're right. I think this is going to happen. Won't the evangelical, I'm going to keep calling them because they are evangelical, whipped up, almost crazies. Maybe I shouldn't speak about people like that, but they are going to blame the solar minimum and the colder weather. They're going to blame it on man-made climate change and man-made CO2 emissions, aren't they? Because it doesn't matter what happens today in 2019. I'm in Greater Manchester, David. I know you know your geography. Just like Southeast Asia, my friend, it rains a lot here. And you know what? We get a couple of rainstorms and somebody on the radio says it's climate change. I mean, they do. Manchester has had rain since Moses was in short trousers, right? But if it rains heavy tomorrow, they blame it on climate change. Surely when we enter this, extreme cold period, they're going to blame it on climate change, right?
They already started doing that. Remember when let's take everybody back to, say, the year 2005. We were told snow would never be seen again. Snow would be a thing of the past. Yeah. Our children would never know what snow was. We need to go into virtual reality headsets to see snowfalls. Remember that?
Yeah.
Remember that? Those were the statements. And then here we are, 2015, 2014. They really started that flip in the media of, well, warming oceans is causing heavier record snowfalls. Wait a second. If the science was settled, where did that bait and switch gigantic flip come into no snow into record snows were expected? I mean, didn't you know that? I mean, record snows were already expected because of heating oceans. You didn't get the memo. Well, you know what? All the memos for the last 40 years didn't say that. So something flipped, and now they'll get anybody to buy it. It's if you say it frequently enough and add different things in our food supply and taint the water and taint the skies and get people distracted with media and people distracted with television and all the news and get them to distract and fight within themselves and drive wedges in our society. Nobody has time to look at what's really going on. And the full game plan is right in front of you there. It's about distraction. So you're not preparing, because keep this in mind. The governments of our planet are fully aware of this grand solar minimum, and they are in full preparation mode. But they don't want you diving into what their supplies would be. So they're sending you in the wrong direction while they procure the items behind. I mean, how can you explain full-on shortages of canned goods in the United States except a mega buyer coming in and swooping all the supply? We've seen it for the canned goods, several different types of canned goods, from tomatoes to peas to beans, canned fruits, the peaches, and different types of things ran out for some time. Now, who bought all that production? And then the long-term food storage too, like kind of MRE packs, if you will. You rip them open, you can prepare 2,000 calories per bag, etc. Those disappeared for quite a while too. People were coming in with cash buys and swooping everything out of all the warehouses. And it's again and again. At first it was ammunition, then it was food, and then second it's food, and now it's a different kind of food, and now it's canned food, and then it was box food. Who's buying all this behind the scenes? And see, if the true grand solar minimum information came out, we would all be buying the same tools, seeds, foods, long-term preparation materials to store your food for a longer time. And I think people wouldn't go to work, people wouldn't obey the law. It would upset the cart before the actual tornado comes right at us.
This is fascinating stuff, David. Adapt 2030 on YouTube. If you put Adapt 2030 in, you'll find the YouTube channel. All of the information. I've been browsing the channel over the last couple of days. Big thanks to John Kitson for putting me in touch with David. I'd heard David's name mentioned a couple of times before about the Grand Solar Minimum. So glad that we connected today. Adapt 2030 on YouTube and oilseedcrops.org. You see, this is the beauty of doing this program. I didn't know this. I'm shocked. Somebody have been mass buying long-lasting dried food and canned food in the United States. If it's happening in the United States, David, it must be happening here as well. And you say because they know that the Grand Solar Minimum is coming 2028 into the 2030s, but they don't want us to prepare for it. Is that even more sinister maybe than maybe you're saying? Is it because maybe somebody wants maybe a lot of us not to be around for much longer after 2030? What do you think?
That's right. I wouldn't exactly call it sinister. I would just call it a game plan being unfurled as we speak. Now, think about Brexit. This is a perfect excuse for the government in your country to bring in as many possible supplies as they could without making anybody blink an eye. I followed a couple butter stories for the UK talking about Brexit. Well, they had all the warehouses completely full of butter, and they didn't know where to put the excess butter, thinking that, when the deal happened, deal, no deal, whatever, that there would be shortages of a lot of medicines and, just regular goods. So they stockpiled. So all you're hearing over there is, oh, you need to stockpile. Well, what's your government doing? Now, if all this Brexit wasn't going on and the government was bringing in 50 times more supplies than usual on purchase orders, et cetera, that might raise a couple red flags. But now all this talk of Brexit allows them to bring in whatever they want to for continuity of government in terms of food, machinery repair parts, whatever it would be, building construction supplies, unhindered. Nobody will even blink an eye, but it would have 5 or 8 years ago if they would have brought in that much material. People would be like, whoa, where's all this going to? So see, there's all these masking events going on to explain away either shortages or just the economy in general, the way it's morphing and shifting. But it's all distraction, and it's all a cover story for governments around the world to prepare behind the scenes. I am so glad that I have seen through some of the smoke and mirrors, and that's why I'm truly doing the channel. I care about everybody's well-being out there. I want people to understand that this is here, and there's a whole different causation for the weather changes that we're seeing that can be explained through history in cycles. So if you know the cycle is going to repeat, you see what the outcome could be, sort of. It's going to be very different today because we have different technology, different interconnectivity and communication-wise, international shipping. The same three things always occur with this Grand Solar Minimum. I call it the fingerprint. We get population migration, population reduction, and inavailability of food and higher food prices, which again tweaks the economy and the economic contraction. So we know these are going to happen every single time. This 2019 to 2030 era is going to manifest a little bit differently than it did in the 1640s. And if you go back to 1280, it's going to manifest differently. Or 800 AD, our current time is going to manifest different than 800 AD, or the late antique little ice age at 535 AD, or 79 AD. I mean, talking about the Roman Empire having difficulty keeping it together versus the American Empire. I mean, it's two different things. So it's going to play out differently, but we know what's going to happen. Those population migration, economic collapse, and lack of food, and then higher food prices. So if you can get ready for that, and you know what's coming, you don't come at it from fear. You can make very wise choices when everybody else is screaming for the door to the left. You can just easily, casually walk out the door to the right. That's the way I'm looking at it, is the more information you have, why the changes are occurring, the better you can prepare for these changes coming.
But you know what, David, what you've just described there, the migration, which would be inevitable, of course. I do believe you, by the way, and I looked very closely at what Valentina Zharkova was saying, and I do think you're absolutely right. We are heading into a cooling period, a very cooling period.
TrueLeafMarket.com. I really want to talk about growing your own food, which will be a necessity moving forward. And there's so many ways that we can go about growing different types of vegetables that we're going to need. Microgreens are incredibly nutritious. They're super fast to grow. In less than a week, you can have something that you can eat. Also, sprouts. We can get those a little bit taller, a little more dense, a little bit larger volume on the vegetation mass coming off of there. So how do you know what kind of sprouts to grow? How about wheatgrass or herbs? What about different types of herbs that we can add to our foods? Now, what I just described to you, there's a full range of starter guides there at TrueLeafMarket.com for you to take a look at. Even if it's just for your own knowledge and you don't purchase something from them, at least get the information so you know how to grow microgreens, you know how to grow sprouts, you understand what some of the herbs are for. TrueLeafMarket.com. Use the link below and give yourself the gift of organic and heirloom seeds.
I've interviewed scientists and meteorologists over the years as well. The ones who will come on, the climate change guys will never come on because they don't want any sort of debate. They don't want to be challenged. But the ones who are coming at it from the point of view that man-made CO2 is not warming the planet, those guys, many of them have agreed that, as you've said yourself in your excellent videos and on your website, the sun drives climate on planet Earth, nothing else. The sun does. That's true. And in a period of very low solar activity, which I believe you are right, we are heading towards, it's going to be very, very cold. Now, the conditions you describe, particularly the mass movement of people, I tell you what, David, those are perfect conditions for global conflict. What do you think?
Well, that would be a perfect way to explain away all the crop losses across the planet that they haven't been telling everybody about, because if the supply chain breaks down, there's another convenient excuse. Oh, your supply chain broke down because of the war. It wasn't that there wasn't enough food to really deliver to you and you can't get it at your home purchase place. It was the war that stopped the flow of goods. It wasn't because we didn't tell you about the crop losses. See, again, another perfect excuse to explain away something that is so inconvenient. That is, if you talk about this, if the news was to get on and do it, as much as Extinction Rebellion is pushed in the news, if they push really this loss of crops that's coming up, I think society would change in a matter of weeks of people getting ready.
David, tell me this. Why are now you're going to tell me probably that they are, but I don't see it. Why are the world's farmers not blowing the whistle on this? Why are because they know, don't they? They must know. A farmer, real farmers, they know their land like they know the hairs on their arms. They know their land. And they will know this is happening. So why are they not talking about it?
They are, but for them, they have bigger issues like getting seed for next year, getting the loans paid off, getting their machinery up and running. They're trying to play catch up with what the weather's throwing at them. And almost all farmers understand the global conditions of what used to be the regular planting by date has shifted months. And we're already experiencing blizzards and freezes 2 times already in this first week of October and the last week of September. So they understand something's changing, but most of them are not on social media. The ones that are do tweet or do videos about it. Yasana Ranch is a great one, going into the corn production, talking about this. But just the general, if you think about 100 farmers, there'll be one that be on social media and the rest are talking amongst themselves, but they're trying to figure out their own day-to-day problems to stay alive in this competitive world of mega farms trying to gobble them up and, try their best to put them out of business. So they have bigger fish to fry literally on their plate of just trying to keep their farms afloat versus trying to warn the world or talk about these such things. That's the best way I can describe it.
David, I've loads of questions for you. It's 26 and a half minutes past the hour. There's huge reaction on Twitter right now to you being on the programme. Thanks for coming on. It's YouTube Adapt 2030. David Dubine, do go to oilseedcrops.org. This is totally true, this. I'm endorsing this because I know it to be true. Because I've been looking at this myself for the last couple of years. It's important that you understand this. Is there evidence of this in stock market manipulation, David? Surely there is. Surely the people who know this is happening, they're having presumably unparalleled success in betting on and speculating on and short selling crops and things like that in the stock market. It must be going on, right?
I think you've seen a couple of videos I've done on the USDA, that's United States Department of Agriculture, putting out such bogus information, going completely against the market. And, get this. Now, this is a perfect example here, and I'll let everybody draw their own conclusion if there was insider trading or if the USDA is releasing information to traders to allow them to profit on what they will say. Now, you have to understand, in the United States, the bombogenesis that rolled through in the early part of the planting season was the biggest devastating floods in American history in the middle of the crop growing regions. There were places that are still not even close to being repaired, even getting the roads back in there, let alone getting the fields refurbished where they can plant. They were looking at an initial 30 million acres taken offline for corn production, 30 million. And that was coming from the social media, the tweets, people on the ground, news forecasts, or actually news footage and helicopter footage, etc. Inland seas formed in the United States on our grow zones. And the USDA had the gall to come out and say that we would increase our corn production 2% from last year's totals. Wow. Now, this bankrupted an enormous amount of farmers because in the same breath, The USDA was giving advice to farmers, knowing that they would get such losses, for them to go long on corn. So if they couldn't meet their obligations for delivery, that they would have some money to pay off the contracts and take the penalty for non-delivery. But then they put out that thing that bankrupted. It dropped so much that everybody got stopped out. But there were 300,000 contracts put the day before to go the opposite way the market was trending. So you tell me if there was insider trading. I firmly believe they need to be investigated. And I think that the way they're doing these estimates, they're more market stabilizers than they are giving us true information. But that was just downright fraud, what they did. And then the second report was really no better. And here we are now. They're trickling away some of the losses. Now where they say, oh, we're going to lose a few percent. You know, these independent forecasters are saying there's a 40% reduction in just the corn alone. And they were calling a 14% down just on what they've seen in the weather reports for soybeans. Just in a matter of days, they reduced the entire United States soybean crop by 14%. And these are independent, forecasters. But the USDA is trickling along. And I love it in their last reports there. They say, well, we finally have some good solid numbers from, what's being planted. I'm sorry. It's taken you 4 months to realize what's been planted or not, and now we're in the harvest season and they're just giving us data from the planting time? Like, where's the disconnect of 4 months of information that's missing? I actually called the USDA myself and tried to find out what the crop insurance, like if you can't plant your field, it's called prevent plant. Now, everybody should have filed by now, so it should be on record how many acres were filed for no plant. I tried to get that information. They told me they couldn't give it to me. They have to wait for it to be released. And I said, you know what? That's 2 months ago that those claims had to be in. Where are the numbers? And they're like, well, it's still being tallied. And I'm like, no. It's not being tallied. It's done 2 months ago. Where are the numbers? And I couldn't get any further than that. So they know what's happening, and they're holding back as long as they can. And insider trading is a main thing going on during these crop losses here. I tell you what, I'm not even going to say crop losses anymore. I'm going to say crop devastation. I'm going to change my lexicon to devastation in Canada and the United States. We're going back to yields that are lower than 1938 for this year's harvest. Put that in context. We're going to produce less grain in 2019 than we did in 1938 because the records only go back to 1938. That's the furthest they go back. So when we're getting this low in production in America, and then look what happened with the army worm wiping out China's crops there this year too. The publicly Chinese media was allowed to say 35% reduction in crops due to the army worm in the spring and then also in the fall. That's official. It's way higher if China's allowing their state media to say 35% reduction. China's exempting all U.S. farm goods to come in. Strategic pork reserves released from China due to the swine flu. Everywhere you look, major producers are struggling. And now just looking at this thing here before our interview, Argentinian production forecast now to go to 18.3 million tons, 3 million tons lower than USDA estimates. I don't know. Everywhere you look, the USDA is a farce. It's working for big traders, and it's not there for the people to give us true information. It's a market stabilizer that releases. There is definitely insider trading going on. I really feel the directors should step down, and I feel that the CFTC should investigate inside there where the insider trading is taking place. This is ridiculous to bankrupt our farmers like this. Tens of thousands of farms, small farms, went out of business because of these bogus USDA reports, and that is our food supply.
And
I'll stop there before I get too irate.
No, you can get it.
It really irks me, this thing.
You can get irate if you want. It's time to be angry about this stuff because it's all real and it's all happening. David Dubois is our guest. Adapt 2030 YouTube channel. That's where the supporting evidence for the claims you're hearing. David is making claims here. The supporting evidence is on the YouTube channel for the insider trading. This is real. Going into the grand solar minimum. Catastrophic for farmers around the world and for global food production. Man-made CO2 is not warming the planet. It's not causing catastrophic climate change. Naturally occurring phenomena, solar phenomena, which occurs in periods throughout history which have been measured and have been recorded. And because of that, mathematicians and others have said that at the end of this coming decade, we're going to be into a very, very cold period. And it's going to last for several years. That is going to have catastrophic effects on global food production, as I've just said. And David has talked here about how our governments know all about this and are preparing for it, but are not letting you and me in on it. And this is really important. David, I wanted to ask you a question. It's going to sound stupid now in light of what we've talked about. But I would have thought that with this weather pattern, with this global cooling period definitely coming, that biotech companies like Monsanto, they might be about to step out from behind the curtain like a magician to say, here is a new seed that will grow and will thrive in freezing conditions. I was going to ask you, why haven't they done that? And then it occurred to me, if they do it now, of course, it's going to give the game away. Is that the answer?
Well, they already have those seeds.
Do they?
And they've been unveiled. Yeah, it's been unveiled down in Argentina, what they're called as stress-resistant crops.
Oh, so that's abiotic stress. Is that not? Because I know they've got a seed for abiotic stress, which is soil that basically has no nutrients in it. Is that a different thing, or is it the same? You know, as freezing temperatures, because they have this abiotic stress seed, which we've known about. Maybe other things are going on to render soil ungrowable, for want of a better word. And all of a sudden Monsanto says, here's the seed. I was wondering about a seed that might grow in freezing conditions. Or is it the same thing?
Well, that's right. This one variety of stress-resistant crop is genetically modified to resist aluminum-heavy soils along with cold, moist conditions. So they put these two constituents or strains inside each other to make this super seed for Argentina that they're using this year. And you know what's interesting is because they're doing that, the Argentinian crop is down. So maybe that seed's not working as well as it's supposed to because they had a little less rain than they thought they were going to get. So not sure exactly what's happening there, but Argentinian production is down and continued to drop next year. So is their super seed working? They had planned it for moist, wet, cold soils with aluminum resistance, but you know the Argentinian grow conditions now are a little bit cooler and drier. So maybe the seeds has to be actually in that moist condition for it to activate or really grow well. So if it puts into the dry condition, it's not going to get the yield they were looking at. So something biotech has gone wrong in Argentina this year. So that's why the USDA was calling all these magic super giant numbers coming out of Argentina, because they were using that new seed variety down there, but the weather didn't pan out the way it was supposed to.